Mercedes have arrived in Japan with a front wing that does something no other car on the grid can do. Footage from China shows it closing in 2 stages, a fast initial movement that ticks every box on the FIA's sensors, and then a slower secondary motion that happens after the monitoring window has closed. Ferrari spotted it, studied it, and have now formally asked the FIA to decide whether this is genius engineering or a clear breach of the rules. The front wing is the most important aerodynamic part on any Formula 1 car. It is the first thing the air hits, and it dictates how every other surface behaves. If Mercedes have found a way to make theirs change shape in a way the regulations did not intend, they have unlocked an advantage that could define the entire season. The data from China already shows them pulling away from the field in race trim, and this system appears to be a major reason why. The FIA will give their answer this weekend in Suzuka. If they rule it legal, every team will rush to build their own version, and Mercedes walk away with a head start that could take months to close. If they rule it against Mercedes, the advantage disappears overnight, and Ferrari suddenly find themselves in a much closer fight. But the Scuderia are not sitting back waiting for a decision. They are bringing upgrades of their own, and in the next section, we are going to look at exactly what they have built to try and turn this title fight around. The front wing is the first part of the car to touch the air, and that makes it the most powerful weapon in any engineering war. Get the front wing right, and every surface behind it works exactly as the designers intended. Get it wrong, and no amount of cleverness on the floor, the diffuser, or the rear wing can fix the damage. This is why teams have always fought hardest in this area. It is not about how much downforce the wing itself creates. It is about how it shapes the air for everything that comes after it. The new active aero rules made this battle even more intense. Now, the front wing has to do 2 jobs instead of 1. It has to work in high downforce mode for corners and in low drag mode for straights, and it has to switch between them cleanly without upsetting the balance of the car. Mercedes have found a way to make that transition smoother than anyone else. Their 2-stage closure keeps the car stable under braking while still giving them the straight line speed advantage that shows up in the data from every session so far. Ferrari know that if Mercedes keep this advantage, the championship could slip away before the European season even starts. The front wing touches every part of the car's performance. It affects tire wear, braking stability, corner entry speed, and how much energy the driver can carry through the apex. A car that gets this right does not just look faster, it looks easier to drive. And that is exactly what the Mercedes has looked like since Australia. The footage from the Chinese Grand Prix shows something that should not exist. George Russell's front wing closes in what looks like a single motion, but frame by frame, the movement splits into 2 distinct parts. The first phase lasts roughly 400 milliseconds, which is exactly what the FIA's sensors are programmed to measure. The second phase is slower, less obvious, and it happens after the car's ECU has already reported that the wing is fully closed. That second movement is the piece Ferrari have been studying since Shanghai. Think about what this means for the driver. Under heavy braking at the end of a straight, the car's weight transfers violently forward. A front wing that snaps fully closed in that moment would dump all its downforce onto the front tires instantly, creating instability and making the car harder to control. Mercedes appear to have solved that problem by staging the closure. The first phase gives them the initial downforce needed to start slowing the car. And the second phase brings the rest of the downforce gradually as the braking eases. The result is a car that stays flat, stays predictable, and lets the driver brake later with more confidence. The clever part is in the timing. The FIA's active aero regulations require the wing to close within a set time, and Mercedes meet that requirement. The sensors record a clean pass. But nothing in the rules says the wing has to stop moving after that window closes. So Mercedes built a mechanism that keeps moving, delivering aerodynamic performance that the FIA never designed the test to catch. It is the kind of interpretation that sits right on the edge of the rulebook, and the only way to know where the line actually is to have someone cross it. Ferrari believe Mercedes have crossed it, and they have asked the FIA to draw that line before qualifying in Japan. Frederic Vasseur did not wake up after China and decide to file a protest on impulse. Ferrari have been watching Mercedes since Australia, collecting data, comparing onboard footage, and building a case that they could present at exactly the right moment. The decision to go public before Japan was deliberate. A sprint weekend leaves less time for teams to react, less time for Mercedes to adjust their setup, and less time for the FIA to bury the issue in paperwork. Ferrari want this resolved while the cars are still in the garage. The timing also serves another purpose. If the FIA rules against Mercedes, Ferrari gain an immediate advantage without having to change a single part on their own car. If the FIA rules in Mercedes' favor, Ferrari get a clear signal that the two-phase system is legal and they can begin developing their own version. Either outcome gives them something useful. A protest in Formula 1 is never just about the rules. It is about forcing the governing body to define the boundaries so the rest of the grid knows exactly how far they can push. Vasseur has been careful with his language, never directly accusing Mercedes of cheating, but his meaning is clear. He said his team is half a second per lap behind in race pace, and that gap is not closing on track. The protest is Ferrari's way of closing it off the track. They have put the FIA in a position where silence is no longer an option. A decision has to come before qualifying, and whatever that decision is, it will shape the technical direction of the entire season. Ferrari are not waiting for an answer. They are forcing the halo winglets that Ferrari tested in China and then removed were never going to be a game changer on their own. 1/100th of a second per lap is what the team estimated, and in Formula 1, that is the difference between qualifying second and qualifying fifth. But the significance of these winglets is not just in the lap time. Ferrari designed them, put them on the car in practice, and when the FIA raised questions about their legality, they did not fight the decision. They simply took them off and asked for clarification. Now they have that clarification, and the winglets will be on the car for the entire weekend in Japan. The Macarena wing is the more ambitious piece of engineering. It sits on the rear of the car and does something that sounds almost absurd. When the driver switches to straight line mode, the wing rotates fully and actually introduces a small amount of lift into the rear axle. Lift is usually the enemy in Formula 1, but Ferrari have calculated that the reduction in drag from this configuration gives them more top speed than the downforce loss costs them. It is a trade that only works because of the active aero rules, and it is exactly the kind of thinking that separates the teams fighting for championships from the ones fighting for points. What makes these upgrades different from what Mercedes are doing is the approach. Ferrari are not pushing the boundaries of interpretation. They are working within the regulations, building parts that the FIA has already approved, and focusing on the areas where they know they are weak. The straight line speed deficit to Mercedes has been obvious since Australia, and the Macarena wing is Ferrari's attempt to cut into that gap without touching the power unit. It is not going to erase the deficit completely, but it does not need to. It just needs to make the deficit small enough that the rest of the car can overcome it. And in Suzuka, with its long straights and high-speed corners, that difference matters more than anywhere else. The numbers from China tell a story that no aero upgrade can fully fix. On the long straight between turns 11 and 12, George Russell was consistently 3 kilometers per hour faster than Charles Leclerc at the speed trap, but the real gap was not at the top end. It was in how long Mercedes could hold that speed. Their power unit keeps delivering peak performance deeper into the straight, a characteristic known in the paddock as super clipping, and Ferrari simply cannot match it. The SF26 runs out of breath earlier, and that difference costs them multiple tenths on every lap. The reason lies in two fundamentally different engine philosophies. Mercedes built their power unit around a larger turbocharger that allows for a higher compression ratio inside the combustion chamber. More compression means more power from the same fuel, and that advantage shows up exactly where Ferrari are struggling. The larger turbo takes longer to spool up, but once it is spinning, it keeps delivering. Ferrari went the other direction. Their smaller turbo is more responsive out of slow corners, which helped them in qualifying trim, but it runs out of capacity at the top end where the straights are longest. What makes this even harder for Ferrari is the engine freeze. They cannot change the hardware until round 13 of the season, and even then they can only do it if the FIA confirms they are more than 2% down on the benchmark. That confirmation is not automatic. Mercedes have been careful not to show their full hand, running their engines in conservative modes during practice and saving the performance for when it matters. The gap in China was clear enough for Ferrari to feel it, but maybe not wide enough to prove it, and until they can prove it, they are stuck fighting with aero parts and energy management while Mercedes keep pulling away on the straights. The Macarena wing is not just about drag reduction. Ferrari have designed it to change how they use their power unit across an entire lap. By creating less drag on the straights, the car needs less energy to maintain speed, which means the hybrid system can harvest more energy during braking and store it for the next acceleration phase. It is a loop that Ferrari believe can close the gap to Mercedes without adding a single horsepower to their engine. The wing changes the energy equation, and that is where Ferrari see their best chance in Japan. Suzuka forces this strategy to the front of the conversation. The first sector is a series of flowing corners that reward good energy harvesting through the S's. The second sector has the hairpin and the spoon curve, both heavy braking zones where the hybrid system can regenerate significant charge. The third sector ends with the 130R and the final chicane, to two places where having energy in reserve for the exit matters more than peak top speed. Ferrari have studied where Mercedes deploy their power and where they harvest, and they have built a deployment map that tries to mirror that pattern with their own hardware. The risk is tire temperature, using lower gears to keep the engine revs higher. A trick Mercedes have been using since the start of the season generates more heat in the rear tires. That helps with grip on a single lap, but over a race distance, it can push the tires past their operating window and cause the degradation that hurt Ferrari in China. The team believe they have found a balance with the new aero parts, but the proof will come in the long runs during practice. If the tires hold up, Ferrari have a chance to make the race closer than the qualifying gap suggests. If they do not, then Suzuka becomes another weekend where Mercedes drive away while Ferrari manage damage. The FIA have two paths in front of them this weekend. The first path is to declare Mercedes' two-phase front wing fully legal, a decision that would set off a development race, the likes of which this regulation set has not yet seen. Every team would strip their front wings down and rebuild them to copy what Mercedes have done. The advantage would not disappear, but it would shrink as the rest of the grid catches up over the next 2 months. Mercedes would still have the engine advantage, the super clipping that Ferrari cannot match without hardware changes, and the championship would become a chase to close a gap that grows with every race. The second path is a technical directive that closes the loophole. If the FIA decides that the second phase of movement violates the intent of the active aero regulations, Mercedes would have to modify their wing before qualifying. Losing that system would not make the W16 a slow car, but it would remove the braking stability advantage that gives their drivers such confidence on entry to corners. Ferrari would suddenly find themselves on much more equal footing, and the upgrades they brought to Japan would have a real chance to make the difference. The championship would open up. What happens next depends on how the FIA interprets their own rulebook. They have the telemetry from China, the footage that shows the two-phase movement, and the formal request from Ferrari that demands an answer. By the time the cars line up on the grid, the paddock will know which direction this season is heading. If Mercedes keep their system, they become the team everyone has to catch. If they lose it, the fight that everyone expected at the start of the year finally begins. Suzuka is not just another race. It is the weekend where the 2026 championship finds its shape.